Friends, there is one ship in the history of the Second World War. Small, inconspicuous. The destroyer escort England, a workhorse of the fleet, of which there were over 150. Nothing special. Until May 1944, not a single victory, not a single enemy sunk, not a single line in military chronicles. In 12 days, everything will change. 7 Japanese submarines, an ironclad plan by the command, a perfect trap in the open ocean, and one small ship that will tear this plan to shreds single-handedly, and in doing so, will trigger a chain of events that will deceive the entire Japanese headquarters and echo in one of the greatest battles in the Pacific. The Japanese will never know who did it. Today, we will find out. Every hunt by the minute, every decision under a microscope, and a finale that no one predicted. Watch until the end, because the finale of the story will surprise you greatly. Darkness, almost complete silence, if not for the monotonous ping of the sonar. The acoustic operator sits in his headphones, not moving. He listens. Somewhere there, in the black depth of the Pacific Ocean, there is something alive. Then, a series of explosions, at first muffled, distant. Then, one powerful one, from which the steel bulkheads tremble. An oil slick and debris appear on the surface. The score, 1-0. 2 days later, again. Sonar. Silence. A salvo. Underwater explosions. Debris on the surface. The score, 2-0. Then, 3, 4, 5, 6. 12 days. 6 Japanese submarines. 1 American destroyer escort. This is not a summary of the victories of an entire squadron. This is the result of the work of a single ship with a displacement of 1,720 tons, about as much as an average river ferry weighs. A ship that, before this campaign, had not sunk anything at all. Its name was England. When Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet, received the report on the results of this campaign, he wrote a resolution. Just 3 words. Send me England. This is not an exaggeration or a naval legend. It is a documented fact that is still studied in naval academies around the world. Because what this small ship did in May 1944 broke several rules at once. About luck, about war, and about what is generally possible for one destroyer against an entire screen of enemy submarines. But here's what makes this story truly strange. England did not just sink 6 submarines. Through its actions, this small ship deceived the entire Japanese command. And this decided the outcome of one of the largest naval operations of the Second World War. Japanese admirals looked at what was left of their screen, drew conclusions, and were wrong. At a high price. How exactly this happened, we will break down step by step. But first, we need to understand who set up these 7 submarines in the open ocean, and why this plan seemed absolutely reliable. Spring 1944, Tokyo, headquarters of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The admirals look at a map of the Pacific Ocean, and the picture they see does not please them. 2 years ago, everything was different. The Japanese fleet dominated from the Aleutian Islands to the shores of Australia. It seemed that there would be no end to it. But then there was Midway. Then, Guadalcanal. Then, a series of defeats, each of which by itself would have been a catastrophe. And together, they meant one thing. The initiative was lost. Now the Americans are advancing, unstoppable, methodical, like a tide. Island after island, atoll after atoll. And so, in the spring of '44, the Japanese command faced a question on which everything depended. Where exactly would the Americans strike next? There were 2 options. First, the Palau Islands, a strategically important archipelago east of the Philippines. If the Americans took Palau, they would get a staging area for a strike straight into the heart of Japanese positions. Second, the Mariana Islands. Saipan, Tinian, Guam. If the Americans captured the Marianas, their airfields would allow heavy bombers to reach Japan itself. That would be a blow from which they could not recover. Both directions were critical. Both required protection. But resources are not infinite. They needed to know for sure. And then someone at headquarters proposed an elegant solution. Between the island of Truk, the main Japanese naval base in the center of the Pacific, and the island of Manus in the Admiralty Islands group, lay a natural corridor. A sea route that the American fleet could not bypass if it were heading to Palau. They only needed to place observers there. 7 submarines, deployed in a line, a screen. Each submarine sees its sector, transmits reports, and if the American fleet appears in this corridor, the command will know about it immediately. The plan looked reliable, even beautiful, from the point of view of naval logic. 7 pairs of eyes underwater. 7 radio stations ready to go on the air at any moment. The submarines took up positions. The commanders received orders. It remained only to wait. Think about it from the point of view of a Japanese admiral. You have a line of 7 submarines stretched across the only path to Palau. Not a single ship will slip through it unnoticed. The logic is flawless. Except there was a crack in this logic. A small one. Almost invisible. The Japanese admirals were thinking about American aircraft carriers. About destroyers. About battleships. They were thinking about large forces breaking through the screen with a fight. They did not think that someone could quietly pass along this screen and pick off the boats one by one, like figures from a chessboard. Because for that, you would need a ship that is simply indecently lucky, and such a ship already existed. It was standing at the pier, waiting for orders. December 10th, 1943, Boston Naval Shipyard. The destroyer escort England, hull number in the United States Navy classification, Destroyer Escort 635, officially entered service with the fleet. The naval ensign was raised. The crew was lined up on deck. The band played as required. From the outside, it looked modest. And that was honest, because England was indeed a modest ship. 1,720 tons of full displacement. Length, a little less than 94 meters. About like 8 railway cars placed in a row. Crew, about 230 people. Not a battleship, not a cruiser. A destroyer escort. A workhorse of the fleet, built quickly and in large numbers. England belonged to the Buckley class, a series of 154 ships of the same type. They were designed with one goal: hunting submarines. 3 76mm guns, several anti-aircraft automatics, 20 and 40mm, 1 triple torpedo tube, depth charge racks on the stern, speed, 24 knots, enough to catch any submarine of that time in a surface position. And one more thing, the most important one. On the bow of England stood an anti-submarine mortar, which sailors called a Hedgehog. It got its name for its appearance: 24 small bombs on guides sticking out in different directions. It looks strange. It works, terrifyingly. In 2 seconds, the Hedgehog threw all 24 bombs forward to a distance of about 230 meters. The bombs covered an area in the shape of a circle and went underwater. And then the most interesting part began. Conventional depth charges explode by water pressure at a set depth, regardless of whether they hit the target or not. This creates an illusion of a result. Explosions roar, water boils, the sonar operator reports contact. Whether you hit or not is not always clear. The Hedgehog had a contact fuse. Its bombs were silent until they hit the submarine's hull. And if at least one of the 24 hit the target, it would detonate, and all the rest would detonate after it. Imagine yourself in the place of the sonar operator after a salvo. You hear the bombs go into the water. Then, silence. 10 seconds. 20. 30. If nothing happens in 30 seconds, a miss. The submarine is alive. Everything must be started over. No comforting explosion next to the hull. No illusion that you almost hit. Only silence. And the realization that there, in the darkness, there is still someone alive, and very dangerous. This weapon required precision and nerves. The commander of England was appointed lieutenant commander, in our terms, captain lieutenant, Walton Dean Pendleton, a career officer, calm, methodical. One of those commanders who does not shout on the bridge, but thinks faster than others shout. By May 44, England had been in the fleet for 5 months. During this time, not a single combat engagement, not a single sunk submarine, nothing that would distinguish this ship from the 153 other Buckley-class destroyer escorts. On May 18, 1944, England, along with the similar destroyer escorts George and Raby, received an order. 3 ships joined the 39th Destroyer Escort Division under the command of Commander Haynes. The task: to intercept 1 Japanese transport submarine, which, according to radio interception, was carrying cargo for an isolated garrison. 1 boat, 3 ships. The task seemed routine. The destroyers deployed in a line with an interval of 3.5 kilometers and headed north, to comb the sea along the submarine's presumed course. According to intelligence calculations, the meeting was to take place in the second half of the day on May 20th. But the England sonar operator put on his headphones earlier. May 19, 1944, 13:25. The England sonar operator sat in his compartment and listened to the ocean. The work of a sonar operator is a special kind of patience. For hours, the monotonous noise of water, the creaking of the hull, interference. The brain starts playing games with you. You start hearing things that aren't there, or not hearing things that are. An experienced sonar operator knows the difference between an echo from a school of fish, a thermocline, and a signal reflected from the steel hull of a submarine. At 13:25, the England sonar operator heard exactly that. A steel hull, underwater, very close. He reported to the bridge. Pendleton did not hesitate for a second. First, a test run, without weapons. The destroyer passed over the target. The sonar operator listened, refined the data. This is not cowardice or caution. This is procedure. You need to be sure that there is a submarine in front of you, and not a thermal layer of water or a sunken ship. A false signal, wasted ammunition, and lost time. The signal was real. Pendleton gave the order to attack. Hedgehog, to battle stations. Imagine what is happening inside the Japanese submarine at this moment. Hydrophones pick up the noise of the surface ship's propellers. The commander orders to maintain silence. The crew freezes. Literally freezes. Because any extra sound can give away the boat's position. No one moves. No one speaks. Everyone listens to the enemy approaching. Then the propeller noise passes overhead and moves away. The first Hedgehog salvo. 24 bombs went into the water. Silence. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Nothing. A miss. Pendleton turns the ship. A second run. Again, a salvo. Again, silence. Again, nothing. Here you need to stop and understand what was happening to the people on board England. Each attack run is not just a maneuver. It's a few minutes of preparation, getting into position, a salvo, waiting, turning, preparation again, getting into position again. The sonar operator doesn't take off the headphones. He must not lose contact with the target, which is leaving, changing depth, changing course. The Japanese commander is not sitting still. He is doing everything possible to survive. This is not shooting at a stationary target. This is hunting for a living and smart enemy. Third run, a miss. Fourth, a miss. By this moment, more than an hour had passed since the first contact. The Hedgehog ammunition is not infinite. Any other commander might have wondered, maybe that's enough? Maybe the target is gone. Maybe we are wasting ammunition. Pendleton went for the fifth run. And here, the Japanese submarine made a mistake. Or luck simply decided to take the side of England. What exactly happened in the depths, we will never know. But at 14:33, an hour and 8 minutes after the first contact, the salvo of the fifth run found the target. At first, several explosions in a row. Muffled. Distant. Those were the detonating Hedgehog bombs. Then, one explosion. Completely different. One that made the steel bulkheads of England hum like a bell. That was the fuel tanks or the submarine's torpedoes exploding. No one knows for sure. But it was the sound of death. At 1439, an oil slick appeared on the surface. Then, debris. Boards, pieces of cork insulation, and a large bag of rice, the standard cargo of a transport submarine carrying supplies for a cut-off garrison. Japanese submarine 116 ceased to exist. The crew of England looked at the wreckage from the deck. Probably someone was shouting. Probably someone was patting their neighbor on the shoulder. The first victory, it is always special. The first proof that you know how to do what you were trained for. Score 1-0. Pendleton ordered to recover samples of the wreckage to confirm the submarine's demise. Standard procedure. Command requires proof. A bag of rice was sufficient proof. The radio message went to headquarters. But there was no time to celebrate. While England was chasing the 116, a patrol plane spotted another submarine in the adjacent square. Coordinates were passed to the destroyers. Somewhere very close, in the same dark ocean, another Japanese boat was sailing, and she did not know what was happening. May 22nd, 4:10 a.m. The ocean in the dark looks the same anywhere in the world. Black water, black sky, the horizon somewhere between them. 3 destroyers move in a line abreast, probing the darkness with radars. The George destroyer's radar worked first. A mark on the screen. Distance, 13 kilometers. A surface target. George immediately passed the coordinates to the other ships of the division and moved to intercept. On England, the mark appeared on the radar a few minutes later. Pendleton turned the ship and increased speed. The Japanese commander was not dozing either. When the searchlights of George finally found the target, the submarine was already diving. Quickly, clearly. The boat commander understood that he had been discovered and took the only correct decision, to dive, and to dive immediately. George attacked, without result. Worse, the destroyer's sonar operators lost contact. The submarine seemed to dissolve in the darkness. This happens. The submarine changes depth, lies in a thermal layer, a layer of water with a sharply different temperature, which reflects the sonar signal like a mirror. Finding a submarine hiding in a thermocline is a task that requires time, experience, and a little bit of luck. England moved to the front. The sonar operator found contact at a distance of 2,300 meters. Pendleton assessed the situation and decided not to waste time on a test run. The data was clear enough. First run. Hedgehog salvo. A miss. The silence after the salvo. The very silence that the sonar operator later described as the longest 30 seconds of his life, again brought nothing. Pendleton turned the ship. Second run. This time, not a miss. A series of explosions thundered underwater. The characteristic, already familiar sequence. First the Hedgehog bombs, then one powerful explosion from which the destroyer's hull shuddered. Diesel fuel and debris appeared on the surface. Japanese submarine RO-106, a small coastal-type submarine, ceased to exist. Score 2-0. Note what happened here. George attacked and missed. George lost contact. England came out and sank her on the second run. Remember this pattern. It will repeat. Commander Haynes sent a report to headquarters and ordered the division to continue the search. The area was suspiciously rich in Japanese submarines, and the division commander wanted to understand if it was a coincidence or not. The answer came the very next day, May 23rd, 6:04 a.m. A mark appeared on the Raby radar. The destroyer moved to intercept, and the mark disappeared. The submarine dove, but the sonar operators reacted quickly. A sonar contact was established, and the hunt began. This time, the Japanese commander turned out to be of a different breed. Raby attacked. The Japanese boat evaded. The destroyer went in again. Again, evasion. This continued for almost an hour. Raby made run after run. The Japanese commander every time found a way to escape the strike. Changed course, changed depth, used thermal layers. By 7 a.m., Raby had used up almost all its ammunition and achieved absolutely nothing. The destroyer moved to the side. It was George's turn. George performed 4 attacks. Result? The same. 0. This was no accident. The commander of RO-104 was a professional. He read the enemy's attacks. He heard the sound of approaching propellers, calculated the angle of attack, made an evasive maneuver at the right moment. 2 destroyers were already exhausted. He might have had reason to think he would survive. At 8:19 a.m., England moved into position. The first Hedgehog salvo at 8:19. Silence. A miss. Pendleton turned the ship, quickly, clearly. The second salvo at 8:34. 20 seconds of silence. Then a series of explosions thundered underwater. Pendleton, apparently, decided not to leave any chances. He ordered another 13 depth charges to be dropped at that location, in case the submarine somehow survived the Hedgehog hit. She didn't survive. RO-104, the third victim of England in 4 days. Score? 3-0. The pattern repeated with frightening accuracy. Raby attacked. Missed. George attacked. Missed. England came out. Sank. For the 3rd time already. On the bridge of England, this probably evoked mixed feelings. Pride, undoubtedly. But something else, too. A superstitious fear of scaring away the luck. A feeling that this could not last forever. And then, about an hour after the death of RO-104, the sonar operators again established contact. Another submarine. Haynes looked at the map. 3 submarines in 4 days, in the same area. Too many for a coincidence. This was not a coincidence. This was a line. An organized screen of Japanese submarines deployed across the path to Palau. And 3 destroyers of the 39th Division were moving straight along it, taking out the boats one by one. The 4th submarine could not be sunk this time. The ammunition of depth charges was running out, and Haynes made a decision. Course? To Manus Island. Replenish ammunition. But he did not chart a direct course. Haynes looked at the map for a long time. 3 sunk submarines. 1 failed contact. An area where Japanese submarines are met more often than flying fish. This is not a coincidence. This is a system. The commander made a decision, which in naval regulations is formally called plotting a course taking into account the tactical situation. In practice, this meant the following. We are going to Manus for ammunition, but we are not going by the shortest route, but along the supposed line of the Japanese screen. If there are more boats there, we will find them on the way. 3 destroyers redeployed in a line abreast. The interval between the ships, 8 miles. Enough to cover a wide strip of the ocean, and small enough to quickly support each other upon contact. Course? To the south. The ocean was calm, almost mockingly calm. Dark water, stars overhead, the measured hum of engines. Somewhere in this darkness, under this water, Japanese commanders were waiting for a signal from neighboring boats. A signal that would never come. Night of May 24th. At 1:50 a.m., George's radar caught a mark, a surface target. The destroyer passed the coordinates and moved to intercept. The Japanese commander reacted quickly, too quickly for George. The submarine dove before the destroyer could reach attack distance. Contact lost. Again. But this time, the sonar operators didn't even have time to start the search. Because at 1:50 a.m., almost simultaneously with the radar contact on George, England's sonar itself found the target. Pendleton moved into position. 2 test runs, methodically, without hurry. The sonar operator refined the data. Pendleton listened to the reports and built a picture in his head. Depth, course, target speed. The Japanese commander also didn't stand still. Changed depth, tried to break away. But England wouldn't let go. First combat salvo. And here something new happened. Not a miss, a hit. On the first try. Immediately. Underwater explosions thundered almost instantly after the salvo. A muffled cue of detonating Hedgehog bombs, then a deep, guttural blow, from which the railing stanchions on the deck of England vibrated. The sonar operators already knew this sound. It meant the end. In the morning, the picture was familiar. Debris, oil slicks, pieces of cork insulation that the Japanese used inside submarines. Nothing alive. Japanese submarine RO-116, the fourth victim of England. Score 4-0. Think about this from the point of view of simple statistics. An average United States Navy destroyer escort throughout the Second World War sank at best 1 or 2 submarines, and this was considered an outstanding result. Most ships did not sink a single one. This does not mean that they fought poorly. It's just that finding and destroying a submarine in the open ocean was an extremely difficult task. England did it 4 times in 6 days, and no one on board could explain why. Luck? Pendleton's skill? The quality of the sonar operator's work? The weakness of the Japanese commanders? Each of these explanations worked for one case, but not for 4 in a row. On board England, something strange was happening with the psychology of the crew. Not euphoria, no. Rather, a quiet, almost superstitious feeling that this ship was under some kind of protection, that something invisible stood between it and failure. The sailors didn't talk about it out loud. Sailors are superstitious and know that luck is easy to scare off with an incautious word, but they were definitely thinking it. May 26th, evening. The destroyers continued moving south. The base on Marianas was already close. Ammunition was running out. People were tired. The ships needed maintenance. Another few hours and they would enter Seattler Harbor. At 23:03, Raby's radar caught a mark. Distance 12,800 meters. A minute later, England detected the same target. Pendleton turned the ship and gave speed. The Japanese commander on board RO-108 looked at the approaching marks on his instrument and made a decision. 4 kilometers, that's not much. He needed to dive right now. The submarine went underwater. At 23:15, the England sonar operator reported, contact. Distance, 1,500 meters. Target directly ahead. Pendleton dropped speed to 10 knots. At low speed, the ship makes almost no noise. Its own propeller noise stops drowning out the sonar signal. The sonar operator hears clearer, more accurately. He heard the Japanese submarine moving to the left, slightly changing depth, straightening out again. Pendleton saw the picture as clearly as if he were looking at the boat in transparent water. At 23:23, England moved into the starting position. 1 salvo. 24 bombs went into the water, and everything was over. 20 seconds, and a series of explosions put an end to it. So quickly and so cleanly that Pendleton, according to some reports, simply stood silent on the bridge for a few seconds. Then he ordered the destruction of the target to be confirmed. George and Raby approached the site of the sinking of RO-108. There was no one to look for. In the morning, what remained of the Japanese submarine lay on the surface of the sea. Deck boards, pieces of cork, oil slicks spreading in circles on the calm water. RO-108, the 5th victim of England in 8 days. Score 5-0. Here you need to stop. 5 submarines, 8 days, 1 ship. A ship that before this campaign had not participated in a single combat engagement. A ship whose commander before this campaign had not sunk a single submarine. A ship armed with a weapon that is silent on a miss and requires nerves stronger than a steel cable. If such a description had met you in a war novel, you would probably have put the book away. Too implausible. Too convenient for the main character. But this is not a novel. This is official United States Navy reports, which are stored in the archives and are available to anyone who wants them. On May 27th, 3 destroyers entered Seattler Harbor on Marianas Island. The crews began loading ammunition. Work went on all night. Boxes of Hedgehog bombs, depth charges for the racks, shells for the guns. No one celebrated much. They were too tired. They wanted to sleep too much. And they knew too well that in the morning, they would be back at sea. Because the screen had not yet been completely destroyed. There, in the dark ocean, there were still boats left. Morning of May 28th, Seattler Harbor, Marianas Island. Loading of ammunition is finished. The crew slept as much as they managed. Coffee, breakfast, a short briefing. Everything as usual. Almost as usual. Two new ships joined the 39th Division. Destroyer escort Spangler and the destroyer Hazelwood, a larger and more heavily armed ship than the three destroyer escorts of the division. Haynes accepted the reinforcements without extra words. More ships, a wider search strip. The group went to sea. Course, back to the same area, to where the Japanese submarines were still waiting for signals from their non-existent neighbors. May 30th, 1:44 a.m. Hazelwood was the first to catch contact, a surface target, a Japanese submarine in a surface position. The destroyer moved to intercept. The Japanese commander dove. Hazelwood attacked with depth charges, without result, but it did not lose contact. This was important. To keep contact with an evading submarine at night in the open ocean, this is already half the victory. Hazelwood held on. At 4:35 a.m., George and Raby approached it. England and Spangler at this time continued the search in another sector, in case there was another boat in the area. The hunt of three began. And here the Japanese commander of RO-105 showed that he was not just an experienced officer. He was outstanding. George attacked. Evasion. Raby attacked. Evasion. Hazelwood again went for the target. Evasion. Three ships, experienced crews, and not a single hit. RO-105 worked like a living organism, felt every attack, every time found an exit, changed depth, changed course, lay in thermal layers, froze when ships passed over it, and started moving again when the propeller noise moved away. This continued for hours. 1 hour, 2, 3, 4. By 5 o'clock in the morning on May 31st, three ships could not sink one submarine. RO-105 was alive. Exhausted, pressed to the depth, deprived of the ability to surface, but alive. This was already almost a whole day since the first contact. The crews on the surface ships worked without sleep. Sonar operators replaced each other at the sonars, an hour in headphones, then passed to the next, because another hour of such concentration, and you start hearing things that aren't there. Somewhere there, at depth, the Japanese commander of RO-105 was not sleeping either, and, probably, was already starting to think that they were running out of air. A submarine cannot remain in a submerged state indefinitely. The batteries are running low. The air is becoming heavy. Carbon dioxide is accumulating. People start moving slower, thinking worse. The commander knows this. The crew knows this. And everyone knows that to surface means to be discovered immediately. This is a trap without an exit. The question is only, when? At 5 in the morning, England and Spangler pulled up to the scene. Spangler was the first to reach the position. Hedgehog salvo. Silence. 30 seconds. A miss. A voice of Haynes rang out in the radio. The commander, who had been watching what was happening for several hours and whose patience, apparently, had been completely exhausted, pronounced a short phrase. England, forward. The ship did not need to be asked twice. At 7:29 a.m., the England sonar operator reported, contact. Clear. Confident. The target is here. Pendleton dropped the speed. The ship set a combat course. 6 minutes. Exactly 6 minutes from the moment of establishing contact to the salvo. At 7:35 a.m., the Hedgehog threw out 24 bombs. They went into the water, and almost immediately, explosions. Not in 30 seconds, almost immediately. As if the bombs found the target even on the approach. A series of muffled blows underwater, then one big one, such that everything that could rattle rattled on the deck of England. Then, silence. Real silence. RO-105 ceased to exist. The Japanese submarine that had kept 3 combat ships in suspense for almost a day, which time after time evaded attacks, which, perhaps, was already thinking it would survive, perished in 6 minutes. From the first contact to the final explosion, 6 minutes. Score, 6-0. 12 days, 6 Japanese submarines, 1 destroyer escort. Stop for a second and try to find something comparable in the history of the Second World War. Not in movies, not in novels. In real combat reports. 1 surface ship, 6 submarines, 12 days. This had never happened before or since. When the report on the 6th sinking landed on the table of Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Navy, he read it. Then, according to eyewitnesses, he read it again. Then he took a pencil and wrote a resolution in the margins. 3 words. Send me England. Not congratulations, not an order, not a solemn speech. 3 words in which everything is present. Admiration, disbelief, and absolute certainty that this ship and this crew are needed where it is most difficult. On England, they learned about this resolution later. They say Pendleton read it, was silent, and said something like the Admiral probably didn't mean him personally, but the entire team. A typical answer of a person who had just done the impossible and does not quite understand how he managed to do it. But the result? Here it is. 6 boats on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. And the Japanese command, which looks at the map and does not understand why 7 submarines stopped coming out on contact. Or rather, understands, but draws a completely wrong conclusion from this. Tokyo, headquarters of the Imperial Japanese Navy, early June 1944. The admirals look at the map again, but now there is something new on this map. 7 marks indicating the positions of the screen's submarines. Or, more accurately, 7 places where these submarines should have been. 5 out of 7 boats stopped responding. Another one, with difficulty, but returned to base. The last one reported that it had been attacked and barely escaped. The screen is destroyed. Japanese admirals look at these marks and think, how could this have happened? 7 submarines, experienced commanders, good ships, and all of them, in one area, ceased to exist in 12 days. The conclusion they reach seems to them the only logical one. Through this area passed American anti-submarine forces. Not 1 or 2 ships, no. Such a number of sunk submarines in such a short time could only be provided by a large squadron. Dozens of anti-submarine ships acting in concert, possibly with air support. And if a large American squadron passed through this area, that means it was heading somewhere specific. And this area indicates the direction, to Palau. The Americans are going to Palau. The Japanese command makes a decision. Significant air forces, land-based from ground airfields, are transferred to Palau and the adjacent area. Additional resources are directed there. The defense is being built there. This decision seems completely justified to the admirals. Logical, supported by real data. The death of 7 submarines in a specific area of a specific ocean. There is only one problem. The Americans were not going to Palau. The Americans were going to the Mariana Islands. Operation Forager, as it was officially called, was planned in advance. Saipan, Tinian, Guam. Islands from which heavy Boeing B-29 Superfortress bombers could reach Japanese cities. Islands whose capture would turn the entire tide of the war in the Pacific. June 15, 1944, 2.5 weeks after England sank the 6th submarine, American Marines landed on Saipan. The Japanese were not ready. Not because they did not know about the existence of a threat to the Mariana Islands. They knew. But at the critical moment, their attention, their resources, their aviation were looking in the other direction, to Palau. Because that was where, according to their calculations, the Americans were heading. These calculations were based on the death of the screen of submarines. A screen that was destroyed by 1 destroyer escort with a displacement of 1,720 tons. A ship that back then had not yet sunk a single submarine in its entire service. Imagine that you are developing a complex military operation. Months of preparation, thousands of ships, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, billions of dollars. And suddenly it turns out that one of the key factors of its success is the work of a sonar operator on a small ship, which simply happened to be in the right place at the right time. This is not a metaphor. This is a documented fact. The Japanese aviation, transferred to Palau, could not take full part in the defense of the Mariana Islands. When the Japanese fleet finally went out to intercept the American landing force, already on Saipan, it went out weakened, unprepared, and with aviation dispersed not where it should have been. On June 19, 1944, in the Philippine Sea, a battle broke out that American pilots would call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. American carrier-based aviation destroyed the Japanese in a proportion that can hardly be called anything other than a rout. The Japanese lost more than 400 planes in one day. 3 Japanese aircraft carriers went to the bottom. American losses are incomparable. After this battle, Japanese carrier-based aviation ceased to exist as a combat force. Aircraft carriers, without experienced pilots, turned into empty ships. That is why in October of the same year, in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the Japanese command would throw its aircraft carriers as bait, because it was no longer possible to use them for their intended purpose. The thread that stretches from the England sonar operator in headphones to the route of the Japanese fleet in the Philippine Sea is long. But it exists, and it is documented. Of course, it is not worth claiming that England alone won the war in the Pacific. That would be an oversimplification that this story does not deserve. The Americans won for many reasons: industrial power, logistics, cryptographic successes, the courage of hundreds of thousands of people. But here is the truth. The death of the Japanese submarine screen in May 44 disoriented the Japanese command at a critical moment. At a moment when a correct assessment of the direction of the American strike could have changed the outcome of the Mariana operation. Could have, but didn't, because the assessment was wrong. And it was wrong because the Japanese admirals did not know, and could not have known, that their screen had been destroyed not by an entire fleet, but by one ship. One ship which was simply fantastically lucky. Or which worked fantastically well. Or both at the same time. This question, luck or skill, does not have a final answer. Professional naval historians still argue about it, because the answer to it changes how we understand war. If it was luck, then the story of England is just an amazing anecdote about the whims of fate. If it was skill, then it is a lesson about the fact that the right person with the right weapon in the right place can change the course of history. Most likely, both. Luck chooses those who are ready to catch it. Pendleton was ready. His sonar operators were ready. The Hedgehog was ready. The rest was done by the Pacific Ocean. But while American admirals calculated the strategic benefits, and Japanese ones tried to understand what went wrong, England itself continued to serve. Quietly, without unnecessary words, as befits a workhorse of the fleet. It had almost another year of war left, and this year would not end as one might hope. May 9th, 1945. Okinawa. Exactly a year and a few days had passed since the moment England's sonar operator first heard the signal of a Japanese submarine in his headphones. During this year, much had changed. The Mariana Islands were taken. The Philippines, taken. The Japanese fleet as an organized combat force effectively ceased to exist. The war in the Pacific was coming to an end. Slowly, bloodily, but inevitably. England had been serving the whole time, quietly, without loud victories, but also without serious losses. The ship, which had been so phenomenally lucky in May 44, continued to exist in the same luck for another almost year. Okinawa became the last major island operation of the Pacific War. The Americans knew that after it came Japan. And the Japanese knew this too. That is why at Okinawa, the Japanese command used a weapon against which there was no good answer from conventional ship anti-aircraft artillery. A weapon that did not need a precise sight. A weapon that itself was a projectile. Kamikaze. The word itself translates as divine wind. In Japanese history, this was the name for the typhoons that twice, in 1274 and 1281, destroyed the Mongol fleets attempting to capture Japan. Now the Japanese command hoped that living planes, with living people inside, would become the same saving wind. At Okinawa, kamikazes were sinking and crippling American ships every day. Not because they were invincible, they were shot down by the hundreds. But for one kamikaze to reach its target, one mistake was enough. 1 second of delay by anti-aircraft gunners. One moment when the air patrol fighters were looking the other way. On May 9th, England was on anti-aircraft duty. 3 Japanese dive bombers appeared in the sky. Not kamikazes in the classic sense. Dive bomber pilots formally had the opportunity to pull out of the dive and return. But at Okinawa, this difference was becoming increasingly conditional. The air patrol fighters reacted quickly. 2 planes were shot down on the approach. The third continued to go forward. The England anti-aircraft gunners opened fire. They hit. The plane caught fire. A black trail of smoke stretched behind it. It was visible from afar, and for a moment, it might have seemed that everything was over, that the burning machine would now crash into the water without reaching the target. But the Japanese pilot made it. The burning plane crashed into the side of England, in the area of the bridge. Exactly where, during a combat alert, the ship's command is concentrated. Navigators, signalmen, officers. Exactly where all the decisions are made. Upon impact, the plane's bombs detonated. The explosion was terrible. 37 people died. 25 were wounded and burned, some severely. A fire broke out on the ship. The very ship that in 12 days sank 6 Japanese submarines was burning. Stop and think about these 37 people. We don't know most of their names. History remembers England as a record-breaking ship, as a phenomenon, as a subject for study in naval academies. But behind this record stand living people, who swabbed the deck, stood watch, sat in sonar headphones, loaded ammunition the night before going to sea. And 37 of them didn't come home. War doesn't care, whether you're lucky or not. But the England crew didn't give up. What happened after the explosion, naval historians describe as exemplary struggle for survival. Sailors put out the fire with their bare hands, literally, because the fire hoses on the damaged ship did not always work as they should. The wounded were pulled out of the burning compartments, the dead too. The engine team maintained speed. The helmsman held the course. The fire was defeated. The damaged ship reached Leyte Island in the Philippines under its own power. There, England went in for repairs. The damage was inspected. A defect list was drawn up. The volume of work was estimated. Then, they sent it to Philadelphia for a major overhaul. That was in June 1945. In August 1945, American bombers dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On September 2, 1945, Japan signed the Instrument of Surrender on board the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. The war ended, and England was still standing in a dry dock in Philadelphia. The fleet, which had built ships by the thousands during the war, now didn't know what to do with them. Some were sent to the reserve. Others turned into museums. Others sold to allies. Others simply decommissioned. England fell into the latter category. On October 15, 1945, destroyer escort 635 was struck from the United States Navy list. The repair was deemed unfeasible. The ship was sold for scrap. No museum, no eternal flame at the side, no memorial plaque on the pier. The metal that was once England was melted down and put to use. Perhaps it was made into something completely peaceful, something that never heard the ping of a sonar and didn't know what gunpowder smoke smells like over the Pacific Ocean. That's the whole story. or not the whole story. Because there is one thing that history remembers better than any museum. When American naval historians began studying the Pacific Campaign after the war, systematically from archival documents, they kept coming across the same name again and again: England. One ship, 12 days, 6 submarines, and a chain of consequences that stretches from those 12 days to the final defeat of Japan. In 1958, the United States Navy Command made a decision. A new destroyer escort, being built at the shipyard, received the name England. The second ship with this name, in honor of the first. This is a naval tradition. Names that cannot be forgotten are passed on to the next ships, like a relay, as a reminder that one ship and one crew can change more than seems possible. Thank you for your attention, friends. See you in the next video.